Hey guys, as you know, I have come down with COVID and I'm sick. I can already sense the hard time I'm gonna get when I get back on Friday. And for that student, you know who you are, who's going to give me a hard time, um, because I gave you a hard time yesterday. But so we're going to pick up where we left off. I apologize. I'm a little winded, still not feeling the best. Um, but we are going to get through this. I'm going to push through for y'all because I'm going to miss y'all tomorrow and Thursday. I'm going to be bored out of my mind. Teaching y'all is what I love to do. And I want y'all to know you're always on my mind, even when I'm not there. So, with that being said, let's continue where we left off. So, for my fourth block, they didn't get to the slide yet. So, the rest of y'all can move past the slide. But my fourth block needs to stay and listen to this slide. Okay? So, let's go to slideshow, begin. Whoops. Did not mean to begin from beginning. Okay. Let's skip through this. Okay. So, this is for my fourth block. Watson's changed. So, yesterday we were talking about this politician named Tom Watson. He started off as a person for the people, okay, especially for the poor tenant farmer and poor sharecropper, which was primarily African American. So, Tom Watson began to change, almost like he became a completely different person. Like his whole personality changed. Around 1904, Watson began to change his progressive views towards race, and by the end of his life, he was a big time white supremacist, meaning he believed the whites were the supreme race. He not only targeted African Americans, but Catholics and Jews with his anti Semitic views. Um, he used his newspaper called the Jeffersonian to kind of preach his political, social, and economic viewpoints in it. And it was read heavily throughout New York City and a lot of the South. Um, so, one of the biggest things that Watson's kind of credited with doing is leading a man to his death. According to some, his series of articles that he published against Leo Frank led to Leo Frank's lynching. So he was solely responsible for killing a man through his published articles. Watson was an anti-capitalist. I mean, you look at his People's Party symbol; it looks kind of communistic. He also opposed America's entry into World War One, which was a no-go. The only reason we entered World War One is because the people wanted it. It was necessary, and because he was against America entering into World War One. The Postal Service started refusing to deliver his publication, which is kind of infringement on freedom of speech. But at the same time, in a wartime economy, like martial law is in place. Anything goes. You have to ration, like the government says. You have to build victory gardens. Well, it's recommended that you do, per the government. You kind of follow these set rules that the government gives. Like you're only allowed to get a certain amount of meat, that sort of thing. All right. So Watson remained popular amongst rural Georgians. In 1918, Watson again ran for Congress, only to lose to Carl Vinson. We will talk about this guy a lot later. All right, Carl Vinson is awesome, who would remain in Congress for over 50 years. Watson eventually won his last election bid in 1920 when he was selected to be one of Georgia's U.S. senators. However, he died soon after his election, and his seat was held for one day by America's first female senator, Georgian Rebecca Latimer Felton. You might have a question about her on the test. Don't know. I might add it. So if you just want to highlight that for yourself, then. All right, so now we get into Jim Crow laws. So, excuse me. This is Jim Crow. So, Jim Crow was a completely fictitious character He was a fictional minstrel character that made blacks look like they were dumb. Okay, that's just me putting it plainly. All right, that's completely false. It was a false narrative created by whites in the South to promote that sort of ideals. So that's who Jim Crow was named after, was that fictional character. The laws, however, are a bit more intense. And the next page is the page that you're going to hate me for, I think. Under these laws, most blacks could not vote. They could not serve in juries. They were denied many other rights of U.S. citizenship, natural rights that all citizens of America should have. So right down here, I ask you, what were Jim Crow laws? Please remember to answer the questions in each section. We haven't got to that question yet. We get to that question here soon. All right, I'm going to refer back to that slide. Okay, so just make sure you're paying attention. So Plessy versus Ferguson. All right, so this was a Supreme Court case. Anytime you see something versus something, I told you it's either WWE match, UFC, or it's a Supreme Court case. This was a big Supreme Court case. A man named Homer Plessy on June 7th, 1892, was arrested for sitting in a whites-only rail car. But here's the thing. You could look at Plessy and be like, this guy's not black, he's white. Because he was only considered 1/8 black and could pass for white. But he identified himself as a black man. And at that time, black men were not supposed to sit in white-only train car. So this would go on to be a Supreme Court case. And the Supreme Court decided that separate facilities were equal. So this was the Supreme Court case that decided separate was equal. Okay? The court determined that under the Constitution, the 14th and 15th Amendments, blacks had political rights, but no social rights whatsoever. Okay? Again, this was in 1892. According to the court, as long as the facilities were equal, quote unquote, for both races, they could be separate. Now, please answer this question about what was Plessy's supposed crime. But let's be real. Do you really think these facilities were equal? Like, that's a white-only water fountain. That's a colored-only water fountain. Honestly, I don't know about you, but it looks like it's like backwash from this water fountain. This is a white-only school. This is a black-only school. You see older desks, newer desks here, more stuff decorated on the wall, older books. It just looks like an older classroom. You see colored-only park benches. You would see this door is white-only. Colored have to enter through the rear of the establishment because places like restaurants and bars and stuff like that did not want their restaurant to be seen as having black people come through the front door. It was seen as a no-no at the time. The 14th and 15th Amendment. So I bring these up because these are the amendments that guaranteed citizenship rights to all African Americans and voting rights to African American men. All right. This was ratified by the U.S. Congress, and the southern states had to pass these. Okay. However, during the era of Jim Crow, the South came up with loopholes. Okay. So when I asked you that question earlier, what were Jim Crow laws? This is when you can go back and answer that question. So Jim Crow laws are things like poll taxes. Taxes on voting. Most poor blacks and many poor whites could not pay this tax and were unable to vote. In some cases, the poll tax was waived for poor whites only. The white primary. Due to the fact that the dominant party in Georgia was a Democratic Party, most of the major political decisions took place during the primary. So a primary election is when you're electing someone to run against um, the opposition. So, for example, you have a Democratic primary. It's all Democratic nominees running against each other for that spot. Well, the whole primary in Georgia was all Democratic. Like, that was the election. It was all Democratic nominees. That was it. Okay? So, the white primary did not allow African Americans or blacks to vote in all important primary elections. So, the Democratic Party didn't allow blacks to vote in their primary elections at all. Okay? Then, when they went to run the regular election, the big time white supremacists won. Literacy tests were used to prevent African Americans or blacks from voting because blacks were not, they most could not read. You gotta think it's only been like not that long since slavery has ended. Most were not uh, literate enough to take these tests, and these tests were ridiculous too. They were super super difficult and hard to pass. The next is the grandfather clause. So basically, if you're poor and white and you can't read and you can't pay taxes, they had a grandfather clause. This clause said that if your ancestor was ex-Confederate, then you're allowed to vote. So question here is, which of these do you think is the worst? Okay, that grandfather clause kind of has my eyeballs on it. That one's pretty bad. That one just leaves out African Americans altogether. Next thing is the 1906 Atlanta race riot. Okay, so this riot resulted in the deaths of 25 African Americans. All right, it was a riot that took place in Atlanta. Atlanta still feels the issues from this, and it's still a subject that's brought up in Atlanta. There's a whole foundation for it. The immediate spark for this 48-hour riot was a series of local newspapers alleging that African Americans or black males were attacking white women. These articles were completely untrue, completely false. Other causes included unemployment of whites because they believed that blacks were a threat to their jobs. That is probably the main factor that led this riot to happening, because you had whites end up being jealous of blacks, especially like people like Alonzo Herndon, who owned a barbershop called the Crystal Palace. But the icing on the cake was the gubernatorial candidates Hoke Smith and Clark Howe, who led these white supremacist campaigns, telling whites to go out and harm blacks, that they should not take over the businesses in Atlanta, that sort of thing. So the riot, you don't need to write anything down for this. So the riot was caused by negative national, international attention for the jewel of the New South, which was Atlanta. Atlanta had a growing industry. African American or black and white quickly came together to end the riot and restore order. Though this biracial committee was historic in itself, as a group such as this had rarely met in the South, the end result led to deeper segregation in the city and more of an economic divide between the African American or black social elite and lower class. It also proved that Booker T. Washington's views concerning the use of hard work and economics could not lead African Americans to equality. So, like I said, the Atlanta race riot was one of the largest demonstrations of violence throughout our history. It had over 400 lynchings happen in the state of Georgia from 1880 to 1930. These lynchings were often orchestrated by members of the Ku Klux Klan, who during this time consisted of teachers, policemen. Like I said, policemen were part of the Ku Klux Klan. So I had someone ask me yesterday, why don't police come and start it? This is why. Or stop it, I should say. This is why, not start it. And other community leaders. Some of the most famous Georgians during this time who supported racial violence were people like Tom Watson, which, like I said, Tom Watson just had a complete shift in his identity. Okay, and this is where I'm going to end for these slides today. I'm going to upload this on YouTube. And just be sure you answer the questions. Next time we'll go over Booker T. Washington. I want you to do these video slides, get these video slides turned in. I hope y'all have a wonderful day.